deeply involved in the production and trafficking of drugs. Monitoring the upcoming sowing season is essential to evaluate the situation in the long term. In light of this complex situation, it's important for the current sanctions regime to continue to be an appropriate and effective instrument to counter threats to peace and stability in Afghanistan. According to some reports, the Taliban constantly raise the issue of the lifting of sanctions. However, there is little proof that this has a significant impact on their decision making. The reports of the monitoring team reveal that there are significant difficulties in implementing the sanctions under Resolution 1988. Some member states have expressed their concern because there's increasingly large numbers of weapons and military equipment that were given by certain member states to the National Defense and Security Forces of Afghanistan before August of 2021. And also because there's also a significant domestic market of small arms and light weapons. Member states of the region have informed of deployment of advanced weapons, including NATO-caliber weapons, against the government forces of neighboring states, as well as the transfer of this kind of weapons to entities included in the sanctions list. Afghanistan continues to confront a humanitarian crisis that is unprecedented. In 2023, over two-thirds of its population required assistance. The mechanism of humanitarian exemptions established pursuant to Resolution 2615 has established the necessary conditions to address this issue without violating United Nations sanctions. And while the Council has encouraged those who provide humanitarian assistance to reduce to a minimum the diversion of assistance to persons or entities, including in the list of sanctions, 1988 sanctions. Some member states have expressed their concern by attempts by the Taliban to redirect humanitarian assistance that is dedicated to families in need, to redirect them to the Taliban, especially in provinces with important ethnic minorities. Resolution 2665 highlighted the very severe economic and humanitarian situation in Afghanistan and recalled that women, children, and minorities are disproportionately affected. The resolution, inter alia, expressed also its concern about the erosion of respect for the rights of women, girls, and minorities. In addition, the restrictions imposed against Afghan women who to work for United Nations and non-governmental organizations continue to be in effect. With regard to the travel ban, various exemption requests were submitted as part of the exemptions mechanism approved in the past for the Taliban and not renewed after 2022. The committee supports extensions to the exemptions for the travel ban for members of the Taliban that are on the links on the sanctions list when these trips are at the service of promoting peace and stability in Afghanistan or for humanitarian objectives. In 2023, the committee approved 16 exemptions to the travel ban for members of the Taliban who are on the sanctions list to travel to 8 member states. However, non-authorized or last-minute requests continue to be a concern because they highlight the importance for member states to adhere to travel ban measures. Your Excellencies, in the 14th annual report of the monitoring team, it was recommended that the committee update certain provisions of its guidelines for its work, including procedures for exemptions and last-minute or emergency authorizations and standard forms. The committee did not reach an agreement on adopting measures to implement this recommendation. As I understand it, the Security Council is informed of this and will take this into consideration. As the discussions continue aimed at promoting peace and stability, there is a growing need to continue to be informed on the activities of the Taliban, as well as of persons and entities subject to the sanctions regime under Resolution 1988 in order to ensure compliance with the sanctions. To facilitate this, in Resolution 2716 extended the mandate of the monitoring team pertaining to the Taliban until December 2024. I'd like to highlight the importance for member states to cooperate and share information with the monitoring team. In particular, given that due to the situation in Afghanistan, The team depends on external sources of information. I would urge all member states, including their intelligence and security services, to uphold the provisions of the annexes to resolutions 2255 and 2611, that they hold confidential consultations with the monitoring team, and that they bolster the implementation of sanctions. Once again, I'm grateful for the opportunity to address this esteemed council and to provide updated information on the work of the 1988 committee and the challenges to which we have confronted in the current situation. Thank you very much. I go back to my role as President of the Council. I now give the floor to Madam Shahrazad Akbar, Executive Director of Rawadari.
Thank you. Excellencies, thank you for this opportunity to brief you. My name is Shahrazad Akbar. I am a human rights defender and executive director of Rawadari, an Afghan civil society organization that has reported on the situation of human rights, including of women, girls, and marginalized groups, since the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan in August 2021. Today, I want to share with you the trends we have observed on the ground in Afghanistan, what this tells us about the Taliban's vision for the country, and most importantly, what this means for international engagement, including by the Security Council going forward. Since the Taliban's return to power, we have documented an alarming pattern of human rights violations across the board. We have witnessed repression of women's rights in every conceivable sphere of life, from education to work to movement to participation in public life. Repression so widespread and systematic that international experts have deemed it gender apartheid. Daily, we witness more cohesive enforcement of these restrictions, with the rise in public corporal punishments and an increasing number of decrees limiting women's rights and freedoms, now numbering 90. The Taliban's promises of an inclusive government, respect for women's rights, or that any of these restrictions were temporary have proved to be a lie. We have witnessed a brutal crackdown on civic space, on freedom of expression in the media, and on human rights defenders. The Afghanistan Journalists Center has reported 99 instances of violations of press freedom in 2023, including 41 arrests and criminal charges of journalists. At least 2 women human rights defenders, Manisha Siddiqui and Parisa Azadeh, who were targeted for their activism, remain in custody. Despite the declared general amnesty, the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan and civil society organizations like ours have documented the ongoing killing of former security forces and government employees, which to date have not been investigated. We have witnessed targeted attacks, forced displacement, and marginalization of Afghanistan's various religious and ethnic groups, such as Hazaras, Uzbeks, Turkmens, and Tajiks, who have no meaningful representation in the de facto administration. The Taliban have further excluded Shia religious scholars from provincial ulama councils. Further, we have witnessed the dismantling of an independent judiciary in the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, undermining of the independence of other legal institutions such as the Afghanistan Independent Bar Association, and replacement of women, Shia, and other non-Taliban judges and legal professionals, which has resulted in widespread impunity and undermines rule of law. What do these trends tell us? The pattern of violations that I have just described illustrate the Taliban's destructive vision for my country's future. In this vision, there is no rule of law. In this vision, there are no dissenters, no human rights defenders, and no independent media. In this world, there is no quality and comprehensive education, and as a result, no economic prosperity. There are no ballot boxes or respect for the people's right to choose. In this future, Afghanistan's government is almost entirely composed of madrasa-educated Taliban members with an unquestioning loyalty to their leader. Women in marginalized ethnic, linguistic, and religious groups have no share in power and decision-making. In this vision, women are less human than men. Women's education does not matter. Their rightful place is in the home. They have no role in decision-making and governance. They are constantly surveilled and held in place by their own male children and relatives, taxi drivers, the religious police, and the entire machinery of the de facto authorities. When women face violence and abuse, their only options are to bear it or die. Excellencies, I ask you, is this a future the international community is willing to support? Now, let me share with you a different vision. We, the majority of Afghans, want an equal, peaceful, and prosperous country. We want a country that's not at war with its women and girls. We want a country that embraces its rich ethnic, linguistic, and religious diversity. And we want a country that respects the human rights of all Afghans. The Taliban have shown you, the international community, who they are. And we, Afghan women, have told you what we want. The choice before you is, will you support our vision of a peaceful, equal, diverse, democratic Afghanistan, or the Taliban's vision, one that violates the UN Charter and the fundamental values that this council claims to uphold? Right now, it's the Taliban who are defining the rules of the game, and the humanitarian organizations, the UN, and the international community are forced to play by their rules in order to negotiate modest concessions. It's ironic that while we have insisted that humanitarian aid can never be conditional, it's the Taliban who have imposed conditions on the work of the UN in humanitarian organizations by banning Afghan women from working in most sectors. And regrettably, the UN and humanitarian actors have complied. Let me be clear, Afghanistan needs continued and increased international assistance. We should also continue to explore ways to relieve the economic pressure on ordinary Afghans without benefiting the Taliban. However, the situation in Afghanistan is not merely a humanitarian crisis. It's a political, security, and most fundamentally, a human rights crisis. And we need you, the Security Council, to be clear that human rights, especially women's rights, will be central to the international community's next steps in Afghanistan. I therefore leave you with the following recommendations. First, as you deliberate on how to take forward the recommendations made by the Independent Assessment on Afghanistan, mandated by Resolution 2679, it's critical to note that no steps should contradict the repeated recommendations of many Afghan women that there can be no unprincipled engagement with or recognition of the Taliban or a seat for them at the UN as long as their systematic discrimination against women and girls continues. Setting out a roadmap for engagement as the Taliban abuses deepen sends a message that women's rights are dispensable. For this reason, I urge you not to provide a blanket endorsement of the report's recommendations without establishing clear and explicit safeguards to protect the human rights of Afghan women, including their full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation in any decision-making or new mechanisms, such as creation of a UN special envoy or broader UN-convened meetings of special envoys going forward. I urge you to be clear that normalization of relations with the Taliban is not possible without swiftly reversing all restrictions on women's rights, which you called for in Resolution 2681, and meeting Afghanistan's obligations under international law, including the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. This must be a collective red line for member states, UN agencies, and all humanitarian actors, and central to discussions of any other areas regarding Afghanistan, including security, the economy, development, counterterrorism, narcotics, and migration. It's also critical that any next steps do not fall below what the Security Council has already called for. Second, I urge you to support all avenues to ensure justice and accountability for human rights violations by the Taliban, including by bringing a case against Afghanistan before the International Court of Justice for violations of CEDAW, and through the establishment of an independent international accountability mechanism on Afghanistan. Third, I urge member states and other relevant UN bodies to label and investigate the Taliban's treatment of Afghan women as both gender persecution and gender apartheid. Further, include gender apartheid in the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty currently under consideration. Fourth, it's critical that UNAMA, as the primary UN presence in the country, retains and implements its current mandate in full, especially monitoring and advocating for respect of human rights and providing protection for those at risk. Finally, the international community must prioritize support to Afghan human rights defenders and civil society, both those who have been forced into exile as well as the brave activists who remain in the country, by expediting resettlement for those at risk, funding civic work in Afghanistan, and continuing to meaningfully consult with the diverse human rights community of Afghanistan. Thank you.
I thank Madam Akbar for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to start by thanking Special Representative Otumba Baiba and Director Rashanham of OCHA for providing an update on the situation. I also thank Ms. Shahzad Akbar for her remarks on the dire status of Afghan women. My appreciation also goes to Ambassador Duragasca of Ecuador. More than 2 years have passed since the Taliban takeover in 2021, and the international community's interest in Afghanistan appears to be gradually waning. However, the humanitarian and human rights situation, as well as the political situation, remain severe. The economy is somewhat stable, but at a very low equilibrium. While UNODC's survey found the opium cultivation decreased substantively, which should be welcome, more assistance is now required for rural communities that had relied on opiate economy. While security has improved overall, sporadic terror attacks are alarming. The strong earthquakes that hit Afghanistan in early October caused tremendous damage and casualties in Herat province. I would like to express condolences to those who lost families and loved ones. The recent mass influx of Afghans from Pakistan is also of humanitarian concern. It goes without saying we remain highly concerned about the human rights situation of women and girls. Japan urges the Taliban to reverse its restrictions on the freedom of women and girls so that they can realize their full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation as called for in Resolution 2681. Mr. President, the international community should maintain and increase its commitment to Afghanistan. The people of the country need to be empowered through greater engagement and more international support. For Japan's part, our embassy in Kabul has continuously and directly urged the Taliban to remove its repressive policies, listen to the people's voices, and build a constructive relationship with the international community. At the same time, we have coordinated with the Taliban to make social and economic progress, and we have provided assistance for the Afghan people. As part of our efforts, Japan recently announced approximately 58.4 million US dollars of assistance, which will be provided mainly through UN agencies to support Afghan people who are facing a multifaceted humanitarian crisis. Mr. President, on this occasion, I would like to touch on the independent assessment, which was provided to the Council by Special Coordinator Cyril Liu in accordance with the Resolution 2679. Japan welcomes this comprehensive assessment, in particular its emphasis on engagement and the need to promote confidence building with the Taliban. I'm confident this assessment will serve as a good basis for discussions on our way forward. Now, international community should recognize the need to increase international engagement in a more coherent, coordinated, and structured manner, and make sure the assessment's recommendations are implemented properly. In this context, I welcome the Secretary General's expressed his intention in his latest report to convene the next Special Envoys meeting. Japan will actively participate in this important conference to form an internationally coordinated approach to Afghanistan. We also believe the United Nations Special Envoy should be appointed to facilitate, engage, among relevant stakeholders as recommended in the independent assessment. I would like to emphasize the role of expertise of UNAMA remains critically important, and I'm sure the UN Special Envoy and UNAMA will work closely and complement each other's roles. The Taliban's posture on this independent assessment is so important. I encourage SRSG and UNAMA to continue to communicate with the Taliban on this matter. The Japanese embassy in Kabul will also actively engage in communicating the spirit of the independent assessment. In conclusion, I stress Japan, as a co-pen holder on this file, will continue to address this issue in order to see peace, stability, and prosperity for the people of Afghanistan. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
President, I thank Special Representative Otunbayeva for her invaluable briefing, and since this is our last meeting as co-pen holders on this file, allow me to also recognize your tireless commitment to Afghanistan and to its people, and your steady leadership of UNAMA. I assure you the UAE will continue its strong support of your vital role and efforts in Afghanistan. And I also thank the briefers for their insightful remarks. Colleagues, in carrying out our responsibility for this file over the past year, alongside our partner Japan, we have worked to build and maintain Security Council unity. From our perspective, it is vital that this unity continues and that it coalesces around an international approach towards Afghanistan that works. It has been 2.5 years since the fall of Kabul. Afghan women and girls continue to face severe curtailment of their rights. For just one example, the recent UNAMA report on the response to sexual and gender-based violence documents how women that are victims of this violence are sent to prison because authorities say there are no other ways of protecting them. The security situation remains precarious, with profoundly alarming cross-border incidents. A week ago, a terrorist attack claimed by TTP targeted a Pakistani police station close to the border, killing 23 officers and wounding 32. Additionally, Afghanistan's fragile and contracting economy is threatened by the decrease in aid funding. The October earthquake in Herat compounded humanitarian needs in a country where 2/3 of the population continues to require assistance. None of this is sustainable, and all of it must move on a different trajectory of hope and development. Afghanistan deserves better. This year, we voted unanimously to renew the mandate of UNAMA, to commission the independent assessment, and to stand up for the human rights of Afghan women and girls. Despite the divisions that sometimes preclude this body from taking necessary action, there was resounding unity on this file. All 15 members reaffirmed the international community's commitment to the present and the future of Afghanistan and its people, especially its women and girls. We did not let them down, and we will continue to support the way forward. With the submission of the independent assessment mandated by Security Council Resolution 2679, we now have a blueprint for an approach that would offer hope for ordinary Afghans. While the assessment is no panacea, it does provide a constructive alternative to a failed status quo. The measures outlined as immediately implementable include provisions like support for agricultural livelihoods, improvements in the health sector, and assistance with water management. Looking at the staggering scale of the needs in the country and the limited amount of aid available, it is very hard to argue against these types of activities. While we fundamentally abhor and reject the restrictions imposed on women and girls, we are at the same time convinced that withholding assistance that is aimed at basic human needs runs counter to our commitment to Afghanistan and its people and to our humanitarian imperative. Of course, even if the Council endorses this approach, and we hope that it does, we should not be naive about the road ahead. This process will neither be easy nor quick, but the essence of the pathway outlined by the Special Coordinator is that it demonstrates what can be gained by both sides from mutual and principled engagement. We've just wrapped up COP28 in the UAE, and the conference highlighted as never before the interplay between climate and stability. The changing climate in Afghanistan does not only imperil its people, but has significant implications beyond its borders. The ongoing drought is diminishing agricultural yields, leading to disputes over access to water, keeping children away from school, and driving people away from their homes. In a country with the world's highest humanitarian needs and where 80% of livelihoods depend on agriculture, the destabilizing effects of climate change can be devastating. The UAE is therefore pleased to announce that it will sponsor the position of a climate security advisor within UNAMA. The advisor will be responsible for mapping out climate risks and devising appropriate strategies for addressing those in order to reduce climate-related vulnerabilities. However, effectively responding to climate security risks in Afghanistan will require tailored engagement and technical assistance to the DFA, exactly as the independent assessment proposes. Colleagues, despite UNAMA's crucial work and the various efforts by member states, there remains an enormous gap between the reality of Afghanistan and the aspirations of its people. This gap will not be narrowed if we double down on a failed approach. The Security Council and the international community must lend its support to a principled and pragmatic process that serves the lives and livelihoods of all Afghans. Nobody is served if Afghanistan is isolated, if its economy implodes, if border tensions escalate, if farmers are made destitute, and if terrorism is allowed a foothold, not least of which Afghan women and girls who must be included in charting their own destiny and that of their country. Thank you.
Agradezco a la representante.
I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates for her statement. I now give the floor to Switzerland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to, first of all, thank the Special Representative Otunbayeva, the colleagues from OCHA, Mr. Rajasingam and Ms. Akbar. We thank them for their presentations. The new Agenda for Peace underscores education as one of the proven development paths that strengthen the social contract and human security. In Afghanistan, 84,234 secondary school graduates took the university entrance exam this year. Not one of them was a woman. I repeat, not a single woman was among the 84,234 high school students with the prospect of going to university. At the same time, we note that in the medium term, the most likely economic scenario for the country is that of a recession, along with an increase in poverty. Afghanistan's economic development is inconceivable without the contribution of women, whether as entrepreneurs or employees, heads of enterprises. Afghan women are indispensable for the prosperity of the country. The ARIA format meeting at our mission on 11th of December confirmed this once again. Afghanistan can only achieve lasting stability, security, and prosperity with the full participation of women. Mr. President, the international community must adopt a common strategy and act with unity. And we have just heard that the Council was united on this and should remain so. The independent assessment that the Secretary General has submitted to us provides an opportunity to develop such a strategic approach, and we support the Japan and UAE co-pen holders in their efforts to find a way forward. For Switzerland, in addition to the inclusion of women in all processes and activities, two other aspects seem to be essential. First, and we have heard this already, I'm referring to the massive forced return of Afghans from Pakistan. 60% of them are children. This is an enormous challenge for an economic and humanitarian system which is already severely strained. Switzerland recognizes the immense efforts made by neighboring countries to take in these refugees. At the same time, we recall the obligations under international law, including international refugee law, and the need for a lasting political solution. On this last point, we are grateful to UNAMA for his commitment and fully support the mission. These events also underline the importance of the broader regional context for Afghanistan. States in the region need to be closely involved in all of these efforts. Secondly, climate issues. A week ago, The Council's informal group of experts on climate and security met to discuss the situation in Afghanistan. And on that occasion, UNAMA highlighted the scale of the impact of climate change in the country, both in humanitarian and in terms of people's livelihoods. It is essential that we step up our efforts on this issue, particularly in view of its regional and global impact. Switzerland is also in favor of reviewing the international commitment on this matter as part of the follow-up to the independent assessment. Mr. President, on the occasion of the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the High Commissioner Volker Turk reminded us that we must rebuild a foundation of hope. For Afghanistan, we could find hope in the prospect of a country where the human rights and fundamental freedoms of every individual are respected, where living in security free from fear is guaranteed. Educational opportunities for all, but especially for women and girls, are a key ingredient in this foundation of hope for a stable, secure, and prosperous Afghanistan. Switzerland remains determined to continue, together with members of the Council, its active support for Afghanistan. And we also continue to support UNAMA and its vital work on the ground. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for a statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Mr. President, Special Representative Otunbayeva, Ambassador Delagaska, Mr. Rajasingham, Ms. Akbar, thank you for your very informative briefings. And thank you to the entire UNAMA team for the work and commitment they have to a stable, prosperous, inclusive, and secure Afghanistan. I want to highlight three pressing topics in my remarks today: the situation of women and girls, humanitarian access, and the UN's independent assessment on Afghanistan. First, the UN's December 2023 report on the situation of Afghan women offers a concrete look at the bleak reality for women in Afghanistan. The report clearly states that Afghan women urge the United Nations to stress to the Taliban that it must include women in all sectors of society. The United States hears their requests and will not consider any significant steps toward normalization of relations with the Taliban until women and girls have meaningful access to education, the workforce, and other aspects of social and political life. Indeed, the international community as a whole has spoken out against these indefensible restrictions. We were also disheartened by the snapshot in UNAMA's December 2023 report on the handling of complaints of gender-based violence against women and girls. The report notes the difficulty that Afghan women and girls face when trying to report gender-based violence. The report also highlights that the lack of female police officers in some units further impedes access to justice for women and girls. Second, the difficult operating environment created by the Taliban is hindering humanitarian access, notably through restrictions on female humanitarian staff. The United States is committed to providing assistance to those most in need. Since 2021, we have provided over $2 billion in assistance. It is imperative to recognize that humanitarian assistance alone is not enough. That is why the Taliban must reverse their policies that keep women from contributing to Afghanistan's economy. For our part, we will work with donors, multilateral development banks, and other partners to support sustainable interventions that create livelihood opportunities, including for Afghan women. Third, we welcome the UN's independent assessment on Afghanistan. We agree with the report's recommendations on appointing a UN Special Envoy and establishing an international contact group. The UN Special Envoy and the contact group will be important for the development of a roadmap that ensures Afghanistan meets its international obligations. They will also complement UNAMA's work to accomplish its mission of promoting peace and stability in Afghanistan. Mr. President, the Security Council must continue to work together to press the Taliban to reverse their destructive course. The Taliban must engage in serious dialogue with the Afghan people to support their aspirations, to put an end to human rights abuses, and to allow assistance to reach those in need. We look forward to continuing to work with Council members to advance our shared objectives in Afghanistan. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the United States for your statement. I give the floor to Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank SRSG Otumbaeva, Director Raja Singham, Executive Director Akbar, and Ambassador Dominguez, as chair of 1988 committee, for their insightful presentations. The overall situation in Afghanistan continues to be a matter of grave concern that needs increased attention and action from the international community. For years, the people of Afghanistan have endured violence, discrimination, and deprivation of the most basic rights. Women and girls continue to be excluded and erased from public life. The Taliban have already institutionalized a large-scale and systematic gender-based discrimination and violence against women and girls. As a result, women and girls in Afghanistan are living under an apartheid regime. Ongoing extrajudicial killings, arbitrary arrests, detentions, torture, and ill treatment of former government officials and members of the former Afghan National Defense and Security Forces remain deeply concerning. Cases of torture and inhumane treatment in detention centers, as well as human rights violations, remain largely unpunished. This culture of impunity is once again showing us the real face of the Taliban. They promise for a more inclusive and less repressive leadership and end up doing the exact opposite. We cannot turn a blind eye to the plight of the Afghan people who are enduring unimaginable hardships and uncertainty on a daily basis. It is essential to prioritize the protection of civilians, uphold human rights, and work towards addressing the root causes of the conflict by promoting inclusive and sustainable development in Afghanistan. Mr. President, the instability in Afghanistan has the potential to spill over into neighboring countries, further exacerbating regional tensions and insecurity. It is evident that the situation in Afghanistan is not a mere domestic issue, but one that has reverberating consequences for international peace and security. We expect that the de facto authorities manage, mitigate, and prevent threats to regional and global stability by taking all the necessary measures to prevent the use of Afghan soil for threats or attacks against any other countries, for planning and financing terrorist attacks, or for producing, selling, and trafficking illegal narcotics. Mr. President, Albania welcomed the independent assessment published several days ago. We must use this momentum to prioritize our efforts to achieve a secure, stable, prosperous, and inclusive Afghanistan, and discuss the strategic focus areas for addressing these priorities. Any progress or increased engagement with the de facto authorities must be linked to benchmarks grounded in human rights obligations, particularly in women's rights. All our efforts to address the overall humanitarian, human rights, and socio-economic situation in Afghanistan will fall short if we fail to urgently address the dire situation of women and girls in the country. We must also support those on the ground who are working tirelessly to defend human rights and provide assistance to those in need. This includes funding of humanitarian aid, supporting grassroots organizations, and offering refuge to those who are in immediate danger. Mr. President, in light of these sobering realities, it is incumbent upon us to rally together and respond to the call for action. We cannot afford to stand idly by while the people of Afghanistan continue to suffer. We must mobilize our resources, political will, and diplomacy to support Afghanistan in its quest for lasting peace, stability, and prosperity. In concluding, we urge all members to redouble efforts in finding viable and sustainable solutions and to stand with the people of Afghanistan in their pursuit of a better future. I thank you.
Agradezco al representante.
I thank Albania for your statement, and I give the floor to Mozambique.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3, namely Gabon, Ghana, and my own country, Mozambique. We thank Ms. Rosa Otumbaeva, Special Representative of the Secretary General and head of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan for our important work. We also thank Mr. Ramesh Rajasinghe of OCHA and Ms. Shahrzad Akbar for their important briefings. We express our sincere appreciation for the dedicated work carried out by the chair of the 1988 Taliban Sanctions Committee. Mr. President, the report under consideration presents several actions carried out by the Taliban administration. The response plan implemented by the Taliban authorities to manage large-scale repatriation of Afghan citizens returning from Pakistan is a positive step forward. The establishment of subcommittees dedicated to providing assistance in various aspects, such as safeguarding the rights of Afghan refugees, demonstrates a proactive approach to addressing the situation. We see the efforts to promote unity and engagement between the authorities and the population through awareness-raising meetings as a promising initiative. We urge the Taliban to ensure that these meetings are inclusive and representative of all segments of Afghan society, including women and girls. The creation of ulemas, shuras, in all 34 provinces is a positive development that allows for greater popular participation in the discussions of development priorities and the prevention and the resolution of conflicts. This process is crucial for rebuilding the Afghan social fabric and fostering trust between the population and the authorities. We take note of the efforts by the Taliban officials to seek investments and enhance cooperation with neighboring countries. We encourage the Taliban authorities to continue these efforts and explore further opportunities for economic growth and development. We take note of the improvement in the security situation in the country, as evidenced in the significant reduction in security incidents, the softening of armed opposition, and the decrease in terrorist attacks. While there has been an improvement in the security situation in the country, we remain concerned about the protection of vulnerable groups, including United Nations personnel on the ground. It is crucial for the authorities to continue their efforts to combat terrorism and ensure the safety and security of all Afghan citizens. While recognizing the ongoing efforts to combat drugs and opium production, we urge the Taliban authorities to prioritize supporting farmers in transitioning to alternative crops for sustainable livelihoods. This transition will contribute to a long-term stability and prosperity for the Afghan communities. Mr. President, despite some constructive developments, we reiterate our deep concern regarding the restrictions imposed on women's participations in the country's political life. We therefore call for a system of governance that mirrors the diversity of the Afghan society and ensures the effective and equal participation of all citizens, including women and other minority groups. In this regard, we strongly condemn all policies or actions that discriminate against women and girls. We urge the Taliban to reverse the decrees that prevent women from accessing work and education. It is essential to empower women and girls and ensure their full participation in all spheres of Afghan society. We further urge the Afghan authorities to prioritize the well-being and safety of the Afghan people and allow Afghan women to contribute to humanitarian efforts. We welcome the engagement of neighboring countries, regional organizations, such as the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, in raising awareness among the Taliban government about the need to promote a more inclusive society. These collaborative efforts have the potential to contribute positively to the development and progress of Afghan society. Mr. President, the critical humanitarian situation aggravated by climate events demands urgent response to save millions of lives at risk. In this regard, we reiterate our call on the international community to renew their support and increase response activities. Supporting Afghanistan's economic development and providing technical assistance are crucial to meeting the basic needs of Afghans and enhancing their resilience. Accordingly, the A3 endorses the release of international financial assets of Afghanistan for the purpose of developing its economy for the benefit of the Afghan people. To conclude, Mr. President, we reiterate our appreciation for the work carried out by all United Nations staff in Afghanistan under the leadership of the Special Representative, Ms. Rosa Otumbayeva, and by NGOs. We value UNAMA's engagement with the authorities and all relevant stakeholders to improve the general situation in the country. It is essential to raise awareness on issues related to governance, including human rights, and to work towards a more inclusive and prosperous Afghanistan. I thank you, Mr. President.
Agradezco al representante de...
I thank Mozambique for your statement, and I give the floor to Malta.
And I thank Special Representative Atambayeva and our briefers for their contributions today. We welcome the focus today on women in Afghanistan as the Taliban continue to enact more restrictive decrees to control every aspect of their lives. It has been 830 days since the Taliban banned Afghan girls from accessing and receiving secondary education. Out of the 84,000 high school graduates participating in Afghanistan's recent annual university entrance exam, none were female. Without access to education, the future of girls and young women is bleak, and they will continue to be more vulnerable to exploitation, forced marriage, domestic violence, and even suicide. Moreover, the Taliban's dissolution of various institutions and independent oversight mechanisms has further constrained the monitoring and reporting of grave violations against children. We reiterate our call on the Taliban to immediately and unconditionally reverse all policies and practices that restrict the human rights and fundamental freedoms of the Afghan population, especially of women and girls. We call on the immediate release of human rights defenders that have been arbitrarily arrested and detained. We deeply regret that there has been no commission of inquiry or fact-finding mission to assess violations against women's rights. Sanctions continue to be flouted. We support efforts by the international community to ensure accountability for all crimes committed. Moving forward, we welcome the performance-based roadmap proposed by the independent assessment. We reaffirm the need for clear, measurable, and time-bound benchmarks based on Afghanistan's universal treaty commitments, including CEDAW. We concur fully with the need to ensure Afghan women's full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation in leadership in all political fora. President, on the security dimension, we reiterate our concerns regarding the significant threat posed by Daesh-K, as well as contributing terrorist activities along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. The TTP terrorist group, emboldened by the Taliban's seizure of power, is exploiting its presence in Afghanistan to increase cross-border attacks into nearby Pakistani provinces, heightening tensions and threatening regional stability. Malta remains steadfast in its support to UNAMA and its personnel as they perform their duties and deliver on their mandate under difficult circumstances. The Taliban must engage with the mission in good faith, respect and adhere to Resolution 2681, and be accountable to the international community. Malta also commends UNAMA's continued cooperation with the UN Regional Center for Preventative Diplomacy for Central Asia. President, over the past 3 months, the extremely dire humanitarian situation has been exacerbated by the forced return of 428,000 Afghans from Pakistan, 80% of whom are women and children. The severe restrictions imposed on Afghan women working for CSOs and the UN has curtailed Afghan girls' and women's access to life-saving humanitarian assistance. We encourage international donors to step up their contributions and UN and humanitarian partners to continue delivering aid committed to principled humanitarianism. The European Union contributed this month an additional €25 million to the World Food Programme's operations in Afghanistan. This will help WFP deliver food assistance across the country. I conclude, President, by quoting Nobel laureate Malala Yousafzai, who just last week called for international solidarity with Afghan women by saying, "It took a bullet to my head for the world to stand with me. What will it take for the world to stand with girls in Afghanistan?" Thank you.
Agradezco a la representante de Malta por su...
I thank Malta for her statement, and I give the floor to France. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I thank the Special Representative Rosa Otunbayeva, as well as Ramesh Rajasingham and Madam Akbar for their briefings. France continues to be concerned by the situation in Afghanistan. France is following with great concern the deterioration of the humanitarian situation and the increased violations of human rights in Afghanistan, the result of the policy of the Taliban. France supported the creation of by the Human Rights Council in 2021 of the mandate of Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights in Afghanistan. Taliban regime continues segregation and violence against women as the very heart of their political identity. Women and girls were deprived of their right to education, eliminated from public, economic, and political life, deprived of the freedom of movement. France will never accept this policy of segregation. The consequences of these decisions on the physical and mental health of women in Afghanistan are unacceptable. Their protection against sexual violence and gender-based violence is not guaranteed. The security situation also is a source of great concern, and France calls for stronger monitoring. Terrorist groups, whether Daesh or Al-Qaeda, are active in the country and constitute a threat to regional and international security. Cultivation and trafficking of drugs remain at alarming levels, with an increase in the trafficking of methamphetamines in the region. Mr. President, France and the European Union continue to be engaged in responding to the needs of the Afghan population. France has contributed over 140 million euros since 2021, and the EU more than 1 billion for the same period. My country will continue its humanitarian assistance in the area of health, education, my country also engaged during the Global Forum on Refugees that took place from the 13th to the 15th of December in Geneva to give asylum in France to Afghan women under the program of Women in Danger. It's also important to continue our support to the civilian population as a severe food crisis affects Afghanistan. Humanitarian assistance must be delivered unhindered and to those in need in conformity with the humanitarian principles. France is engaged to contribute to a unified strategy in Afghanistan. In respect of the requirements established by the Security Council must guide us. Resolution 2681 adopted unanimously, just as Resolution 2593 established clear of what is expected of the Taliban. We welcome the independent review of the situation in Afghanistan conducted by Feridun Sinir Leoglu. We believe that these conclusions must inform the discussions among all the stakeholders and contribute to crafting a unified strategy. This strategy, of course, should aim for the well-being of the Afghan population first and foremost, but without endorsing any kind of discrimination. It must be the driver of an inclusive political process that will allow Afghan women to participate in decision-making concerning Afghanistan. Lastly, France will pay particular attention to preserving the capacity for action of UNAMA and the robustness of its mandate. I'd like to take this opportunity to once again express our wholehearted support to UNAMA, to the Special Representative of the Secretary General, and to all the UN agencies and their partners on the ground who are doing essential work for the country. Thank you very much. I thank the representative of France for her statement, and I give the floor to Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank Special Representative Rosa Otunbayeva, Director Ramesh Rajasingham, Executive Director Shahrazad Akbar, and the Chair of the 1988 Sanctions Committee, Ambassador José de la Gasca, for their insightful remarks and their commitment to a stable, peaceful, and prosperous Afghanistan. As this is Brazil's last quarterly briefing on the situation in Afghanistan during our current mandate, I wish to reflect on some of the core pillars of our work on the file. First, promoting dialogue and engagement over isolation. Second, addressing the socio-economic roots of Afghanistan's challenges. And third, upholding the human rights of all, especially women and children. The first of these pillars highlights the importance of maintaining open and active communication channels with Afghanistan. To that effect, the international community must continue to engage constructively, recognizing the complexities and nuances on the ground, with the objective of fostering a state that is politically and ethnically inclusive, free of terrorism and narcotics, respectful of all human rights, and economically stable. The role of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, UNAMA, remains crucial in supporting these endeavors. International support in these areas is not just necessary, but vital. Secondly, it is essential to address Afghanistan's challenges at their roots. We welcome the de facto authorities' efforts to stabilize the economy, curb corruption, fight terrorism and drug production and trafficking, increase tax revenue, and engage in regional economic cooperation. Progress made in those areas deserves encouragement. At the same time, it is equally important to address the issue of the frozen Afghan assets in an effective manner. We urge relevant stakeholders to find agreeable mechanisms to inject these funds into Afghanistan's economy, offering much-needed relief. Third, and perhaps most crucial, is respecting human rights, particularly those of women and children. It is deeply regrettable that Afghan girls are denied proper education and women have no opportunities to work. Discrimination in all its forms must cease. Brazil calls on the de facto authorities to reverse restrictive policies and foster an inclusive political and social system that incorporates women and minority groups. Brazil once again welcomes the independent assessment issued under Resolution 2679. This comprehensive document represents a beacon of hope, acknowledging the need for a new model of engagement reflective of Afghanistan's current political realities. We also hope for a positive outcome in the ongoing negotiations to launch the process outlined in the independent assessment. We also look forward to the follow-up meeting of Special Envoys for Afghanistan, soon to be convened by the Secretary General as part of a broader international push for a unified approach to engaging with the de facto authorities. Mr. President, I extend our gratitude to Japan and the UAE for their active role as the Council's pen holders on the Afghan file throughout the year. I commend the Secretariat, the Special Representative, the UNAMA team, United Nations agencies, and various humanitarian and civil society organizations for their tireless efforts, which remain instrumental in addressing the challenges faced by the Afghan people. Brazil will continue to follow these developments closely, including from the chair of the Peacebuilding Commission next year, recognizing that a stable, peaceful, and prosperous Afghanistan can yield far-reaching benefits to peace and stability in its region. Finally, we reaffirm our solidarity with the Afghan people, and especially Afghan women and children, and stand ready to support efforts ensuring their safety, security, and well-being. Thank you.
Agradezco al representante de Brasil por...
I thank Brazil for your statement. I give the floor to China.
Mr. President, I thank Special Representative Altambayeva and all other briefers for their briefings. As the year draws to a close, a year-end stock-taking of the Afghan issue will help us sum up experience and lessons learned and get next year off to a good start. Over the past year, the Afghan interim government has governed actively, the economy has seen some recovery, and the domestic situation has been generally stable. Yet, Afghanistan is still faced with severe humanitarian and livelihood crises. Problems such as the protection of the rights and interests of women and girls and the threat of terrorist forces, among others, remain pronounced. The UN, regional organizations, and Afghanistan's neighbors have maintained their attention on the situation in the country. The Council has considered the Afghan issue regularly, and the Secretary General has appointed a special coordinator for an independent assessment of the situation in the country. However, the efforts of the international community have yet to produce notable results. To address the multiple challenges facing Afghanistan and effectively help the Afghan people get out of their plight, we need to step up reflection and input and take a more flexible and practical approach towards integrated and systematic solutions. I wish to make 4 points. First, help Afghanistan respond to the humanitarian crisis. At present, over 3 million Afghan children are malnourished, and over 10 million people there do not know where the next meal is. Winter is here, and the Afghan humanitarian disaster will get even worse. We once again call upon the international community to act immediately by stepping up humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, bringing warmth and hope to the Afghan people, and not letting ordinary Afghans become victims of political considerations. We also hope that all parties will take a long-term view, increase development aid to Afghanistan, and help the country restore the functioning of its banking system, establish basic economic order, and better integrate into regional economic and trade cooperation and connectivity. Meanwhile, the frozen overseas assets of Afghanistan and their interest should be returned to the Afghan people as soon as possible. Second, help Afghanistan strengthen protection of the rights and interests of women. Afghan women and girls have rights to education and employment. The Afghan Taliban authorities should take concrete actions to implement the requests of the Security Council resolutions and respond to the concerns of the international community. Meanwhile, we need to see that the rights and interests of women and girls will not be realized in a vacuum. The international community should support Afghanistan with its peaceful reconstruction and economic recovery so as to create more enabling conditions for guaranteeing the rights and interests of women and girls. We should refuse to oversimplify the issue into absolutes and still less instrumentalize or weaponize it. Third, enhance engagement with the Afghan authorities. As is pointed out in the independent assessment on Afghanistan, the international community should get a clear picture of the political reality in the country, prioritize the interests of the Afghan people, and maintain engagement with the country. Undoubtedly, it is the current political reality in Afghanistan that the Afghan Taliban is governing the country. When engaging with the Afghan authorities, the international community needs to demonstrate good faith, set no preconditions, communicate with the Afghan Taliban in ways easily acceptable to it, and strive for its understanding and cooperation. And as for the follow-up to the independent assessment, the Security Council should consider the needs of the Afghan people and the expectations of the international community in an integrated manner and make its decision on the basis of full consultations. The Council should adjust the sanctions measures in a timely manner and in particular reinstate the travel ban exemption on some Taliban officials to facilitate engagement with Afghanistan. Fourth, bolster support for the Afghan authorities in their counter-terrorism efforts. Currently, terrorist forces in Afghanistan remain active and pose threats to the security of Afghanistan and countries in the region. The international community should urge and help Afghanistan to effectively combat terrorism and resolutely prevent Afghanistan from once again becoming a hub for terrorist organizations. The Afghan authorities should, as requested by the Security Council resolutions, take robust measures to prevent terrorists from using its territory to engage in terrorist activities that threaten other countries. According to UNODC reports, the area of poppy cultivation in the country dropped by 95% following the drug ban. This deserves full recognition. The international community should provide Afghanistan with targeted support, such as alternative cultivation and drug rehabilitation, among others. Mr. President, as Afghanistan's neighbor, China has always actively supported its peaceful development and taken concrete actions to help the Afghan people and ease their suffering. We stand ready to continue our active participation in coordination and cooperation with Afghanistan under frameworks such as the Coordination and Cooperation Mechanism among Neighbors of Afghanistan, the SCO, and the China Central Asia Cooperation Mechanism, continue our support for the work of UNAMA and the positive role of the UN, and work with regional countries and the international community at large to help Afghanistan get out of the plight and achieve lasting peace and stability at an early date. Thank you, President.
Agradezco al representante.
I thank China for your statement. I now give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. Let me join others in thanking SRSG, Otunbayeva, and our other briefers for their important remarks today. President, the United Kingdom remains gravely concerned at the continued curtailment of human rights and fundamental freedoms in Afghanistan, particularly for women and girls. This, along with ongoing reports of arbitrary arrests and detentions, is in clear violation of the international commitments that all states must adhere to. We echo UNAMA's recommendation that the international community should maintain its multilateral advocacy on women's rights and gender equality. The UK is, of course, a firm supporter of these values, and we will continue to raise them at every opportunity. Since UNAMA's last briefing to the Council, Herat was struck by successive devastating earthquakes. In response, the UK has provided around $4 million in emergency support to those affected, including a further $13 million to support Afghans across the country during the winter months. We have also committed $23.5 million to the International Organization for Migration to support vulnerable, undocumented Afghans returning to the country. President, it's been over 2 years now since the Taliban took power in Afghanistan. As the independent assessment on Afghanistan concluded, our shared goal should be an Afghanistan that is at peace with its people, its neighbours, and the international community. It's our view that the independent assessment outlines the architecture and mechanisms that are needed to achieve this. For our part, the United Kingdom is fully committed to finding a constructive way forward. In the absence of a coherent international strategy to date, it is the responsibility of this Council to seize the momentum provided by this report. We look forward to continuing to work constructively with international partners and the full range of Afghan stakeholders in our shared endeavour towards improving the lives of all Afghans. Thank you.
Agradezco al representante.
I thank the United Kingdom for your statement, and I now give the floor to the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we would like to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, the head of the United Nations Assistance Mission Afghanistan, Ms. Otunbayeva, the Director of Coordination of OCHA, Mr. Rajasingham, for the assessment of the situation in Afghanistan. Russian Federation supports UNAMA's work under your leadership within the framework of the tasks that the mission is entrusted with. We note that Kabul is interested in developing contacts with you, and we welcome UN's commitment to maintaining its presence and providing the assistance needed to the people of Afghanistan. We listened very closely to the statement made by the chair of the Security Council 1988 Sanctions Committee on the Taliban movement, the PR of Ecuador, Mr. José de la Gasque, and to the representative of the civil society, Ms. Shahrazad Akbar. And we are glad to see that regional representatives will also will speak during the discussion today. We took note of Secretary General's report on Afghanistan and would like to point out the following. Over 2.5 years, the Taliban are in power, despite what was said by Western colleagues about their possible collapse. Afghanistan endured. Under unprecedented unilateral sanctions and humanitarian crisis, the country did not slide into yet another civil war and did not become a black hole. More than 1.3 million of the IDPs returned to their homes, and this is an unprecedented figure. But taking into account the scope of challenges and the slew of issues that remained after the foreign troops fled, the people of Afghanistan more than ever need our sustained assistance and support. And we have said many times that there is a need to have a realistic, comprehensive approach to Afghanistan, the kind of approach that will set aside narrow interests and focus very closely on the needs of the Afghans themselves, an approach that would be based on the sober assessment of the situation on the ground and the readiness of the de facto authorities themselves to adequately react to international community's expectations. We can see that they remain interested in developing a broad, pragmatic interaction. At the same time, it's clear that progress is hardly possible if individual Western donors continue placing all of their responsibility on Taliban alone and demand that they fulfill their obligations. How many more years need to pass before you admit the ineffectiveness and inefficiency of intimidations, pressure, and blackmail? Under current conditions, without reciprocal steps by you, we are on the road to nowhere. We share some assessment of the Secretary General on the situation in the country. Despite the efforts made by the de facto authorities, we're still concerned by security risks, including those that result from the activity of the ISIL Khorasan group and the FTFs related to it. We can see that the terrorists intend to escalate the situation. They want to present themselves as a real alternative and undermine the stability in neighboring countries. It is clear that in order to fully eliminate the terrorists, what is being done by the Taliban is not enough. At the same time, the risk of a spillover of that into other countries of Central Asia remain very real. Also, the issue of drugs is very closely linked to that. We are convinced there's no alternative to international assistance in eliminating that, including through an ODC. These efforts must be increased and meet consistency. We're also concerned by the issue of synthetic drugs manufacturing. We're also closely following the humanitarian and socioeconomic situation in the country, and we note that the efforts made by the UN and regional organizations to provide humanitarian assistance. We value the contribution by humanitarian agencies and their staff who are ready to remain on the ground and help the Afghans under any conditions. But it is clear that this is not enough. What is needed here is the rejection of politicizing the humanitarian assistance, defreezing of assets, and broader cooperation with a view to subsequent economic recovery. We continue also witnessing the evolving situation in the area of the rights of all Afghans, including the universal rights of women and girls to education and work. We take note of the statements by the de facto authorities and we expect that this issue will be resolved in short order. Yet another imperative here is a forming of a truly inclusive government with the participation of all ethnic and political groups in the country, and we expect to see advances here very soon. Mr. President, the Russian Federation fully supports the right and the desire of the Afghan people to live in peace and stability. The order and peace in the region depends on this. But building such a lasting and sustainable peace is impossible without painstaking practical interaction with de facto authorities on a wide range of issues. There is no alternative to this. It is our view that such a comprehensive approach will determine to what extent UNAMA will be able to discharge its tasks. And in this regard, we welcome the efforts made by the Special Coordinator Feridan Sinirologlu to prepare an independent assessment report on Afghanistan, including the fact that he emphasized a comprehensive dialogue with de facto authorities on the basis of an across-the-board approach to all of the urgent issues. The extent to which this will be coordinated and smooth will determine how quickly it will be possible to break the deadlock in the current situation and subsequent international reintegration of Afghanistan. We're happy to see that many ideas in the report echo the approach taken on by the regional actors to settlement in the country, including the ones which were voiced by members of the Moscow format. In conclusion, I would like to thank UAE and Japan for their tireless efforts as informal penholders of the Afghanistan dossier in the Security Council. I thank you.
Agradezco al
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation. I will now make a statement in my national capacity as representative of Ecuador. We're grateful for the briefing by the Special Representative Rosa Tumbaeva and by the representative of OCHA and by Madam Shahzad Executive Director of Rawada, of the Civil Society Organization. My delegation would like to confirm our support for the work of UNAMA and the mandate contained in Resolution 2678, which we consider robust and comprehensive, and we will support its renewal in upcoming March. We take note of the report of the Secretary General on the situation in Afghanistan and its implications for peace and international peace and security. Its contents coincides with the report presented by the Special Coordinator of the Independent Review on Afghanistan last November. Now, referring to these reports, my delegation would like to express our concerns on the following aspects. How fragile the Afghan economic system is, which has exacerbated poverty, unemployment, and underemployment. The continuation of practices that violate human rights, such as extrajudicial executions, arbitrary detentions, public corporal punishment, persecution, and censorship of the media. The persistence of security risks for the civilian population due to this illegal circulation of weapons, munitions, and explosives, as well as due to the terrorist attacks attributed to the Islamic State of the Levant and Khorasan. The deterioration of the humanitarian situation and increase in the number of malnourished children and in people who depend on humanitarian assistance to survive. The situation of vulnerability in which IDPs and refugees find themselves, mostly children and teenagers. Often they're forced to return by neighboring countries. And on this, we'd like to reiterate the need to respect the principle of no return, and that the process of return should be voluntary, dignified, and safe. The Security Council has followed very closely the situation in Afghanistan throughout 2023, and in particular, the restrictive measures imposed by the Taliban regime against women and girls that have generated a institutionalized system of gender-based discrimination, trampling on their rights and freedoms. The example of the effects of these measures is that among the 84,000 high school graduates that applied for admission to university in 2023, not a single woman. There's not a single woman. This system established by the Taliban regime should be dismantled, and access by women and girls to their fundamental rights and liberties should be restored immediately. In this situation, and bearing in mind recommendations of the independent review, We believe that it is the responsibility of the Council to analyze mechanisms to encourage an inclusive, participatory inter-Afghan dialogue and promote cooperation that makes it possible to improve the living conditions of the population and endow the Special Envoy with a mandate that allows for the effective and complementary support to the efforts of UNAMA. Whatever action is taken, it should be linked to restoring civil rights, the rule of law, and the full egalitarian, meaningful, and safe participation of women in all discussions on the future of Afghanistan. Thank you very much. I go back to my role as President of the Council, and I give the floor to the representative of Afghanistan.
Thank you, Mr. President, for convening this meeting, and I commend you for your excellent leadership of the Council for this month. And I thank SRSG, Ms. Rosa Otunbayeva, and Mr. Ramesh and Ambassador Jose de la Gasca, Chair of the 1988 Sanctions Committee, and Ms. Shahrzad Akbar for their comprehensive and insightful briefings. I thank the previous speakers for reaffirming their commitments to continue supporting the fundamental human rights of the people of Afghanistan, particularly women and girls, and for their ongoing efforts to help bring about real peace based on the will of the people in a stable, secure, and united Afghanistan. I also extend our appreciation to all donors, the UN system, as well as national and international NGOs for remaining engaged and continuing to provide vital humanitarian and life-saving support to the people of Afghanistan. Moreover, I would like to commend the United Arab Emirates as the co-pen holder of Afghanistan file and all other outgoing members of the Council for their support to the people of Afghanistan, their commitment to peace and security, support for the stability in Afghanistan, and advocacy for human rights, especially for women and girls, deserves our utmost appreciation. Mr. President, as Afghanistan enters its third year under Taliban's repressive and unilateral rule, the country remains confronted with myriad of complex challenges and uncertainty. A staggering 29 million people are in need of humanitarian aid. And the fundamental rights of women and girls, such as the right to work and access to education, are systematically denied. Female employees of non-governmental organizations and the United Nations face restrictions on their ability to work, while female protesters are subjected to daily detention and torture. Additionally, targeted killings of Shia scholars and our fellow Hazara compatriots persist, along with extrajudicial killings of former security and defense forces. The growing presence and activities of terrorist groups in Afghanistan pose escalating and wide-ranging security threats to the country, the region, and wider world. Furthermore, the decline in humanitarian aid, natural disasters, forced migrant returns, unemployment, and poverty contribute to the prevailing uncertainty about the future. It's crucial to recognize that the Taliban have not only failed to address these challenges, but have exacerbated them. Since their forced takeover, there has been a systematic erosion of human rights, particularly the rights of women and girls, leading to gender apartheid. This not only violates human rights, but directly contradicts Afghanistan's obligations under international law, including the Convention on the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Unfortunately, it's due to the Taliban's policies and the humanitarian crisis that the human capital of Afghanistan, including the youth, educated and professional individuals, former civil servants, and military personnel, are either unemployed or forced to leave the country. It is evident that the current circumstances are primarily as a result of the Taliban's persistent repressive policies in regard to their disregard for the demands of the Afghan people, the political impasse, the absence of a legitimate national government, coupled with the lack of a coherent and coordinated strategy by the international community to address the current tragic situation in Afghanistan. Mr. President, the key question is what should we do and what the international community can do. In this context, let me thank the members of the Security Council for adopting Resolution 2679 and the UN Secretary General and his special coordinator for presenting the independent assessment report to the Security Council. The findings of the independent assessment report are commendable in their objectivity and depth, shed light on some of the challenges our nation faces, and serves as a critical reminder of the responsibilities shouldered by the international community, including this Council, towards Afghanistan. While the report falls short of adequately recognizing the Taliban as the primary actor in the current crisis, their repressive policies, human rights violations, and certain aspects of the current situation in Afghanistan, we in general appreciate this timely and much-needed report. It can serve as a solid foundation and a guiding document for initiating discussions to address existing problems and fundamental challenges. Furthermore, the report's key recommendations offer a path for progress and ensuring positive trajectory for the way forward. We welcome the very core message of the assessment report on the fact that the status quo is not acceptable nor sustainable, and that the current international approach to Afghanistan is not working. We further welcome the report's specific emphasis on restoring the fundamental rights of all citizens, particularly women and girls, and their active participation across all fields, and on the necessity of establishing inclusive and broad-based governance through a national dialogue grounded in a constitutional order and comprehensive structure. It is crucial to underscore the need for the United Nations Security Council and all relevant partners to agree on an action plan with a defined timetable and specific conditions for implementing the report's recommendations and subsequent steps, including through appointing a special coordinator as recommended in the report. This ensures that all parties, including the people of Afghanistan, are well informed about the results of a structured, coherent, and principled international engagement. A clear understanding of the outcome and commitments from all sides is essential for fostering transparency and accountability. It's crucial to ensure the active and meaningful participation and contribution of Afghan women and girls in all discussions related to the implementation of the assessment report. No compromises should be made concerning their fundamental rights, freedoms, and involvement in relevant mechanisms and processes. I also wish to emphasize the importance of maintaining the conditionality of recommendations and a clear and benchmark implementation process. Otherwise, serious and existing concerns about the prospects of further relaxation and normalization efforts with the Taliban without observable changes or reversals in their policies and actions will not only remain but also grow stronger. These concerns have been expressed in open letters by representatives of diverse Afghans, including women activists and civil society groups. We recommend that their comments be attentively heard and thoughtfully considered in the subsequent steps of implementation report, recognizing the valuable prospects of women and society representatives. Mr. President, I would like to remind this Council that the international community about increasing calls by the Afghan people for rejecting any form of normalization with the Taliban regime that fails to respect human rights and international norms, and to remain focused on finding a solution that results in the formation of a truly inclusive, broad-based, and legitimate administration that is able to reflect the will and national aspirations of the people of Afghanistan. The path forward should be shaped by the voices of all Afghans, reflecting the country's rich diversity and the shared desire for peace and prosperity. the Taliban's refusal to engage in dialogue and their warped interpretation of inclusivity are both unfounded and false. True inclusivity requires the Afghan people to shape their future through negotiations involving credible representatives from all segments of society, including marginalized groups of women, youth, democratic forces, military sectors, career diplomats, civil society, and human rights activists. Those who are free from corruption, reputable public figures, and professionals. It is based on the rule of law for justice and accountability. It is crucial to establish a responsible, representative, and legitimate government system based on the rule of law, justice, and accountability. The onus is now on the Taliban to prioritize Afghanistan's national interest by resolving the political impasse and respecting the legitimate concerns and demands of the Afghan people and international community. Mr. President, let me echo the UN Secretary General's appeal on reconsidering and halting of the forced return of Afghan refugees from Pakistan. I would like to express our sincere appreciation to the government and people of regional countries, particularly Pakistan and Iran, for graciously hosting Afghan refugees and ask for a compassionate and sustainable solution with the support of UNHCR and international community that prioritize the safety, well-being, and dignity of Afghan refugees. Mr. President, before concluding, I express gratitude to the UN Security Council for unanimously renewing the mandate of 1988 Sanctions Monitoring Team for another year. We anticipate that this renewal will contribute to reinforcing the effective implementation of sanctions regime, enhancing monitoring and reporting on the presence and activities of terrorist groups in Afghanistan and the region. In conclusion, let us reaffirm our resolve to not merely witness the unfolding tragedy in Afghanistan, but to actively participate in the creation of a just, inclusive, and representative future. A future where every Afghan child can aspire to education, where women participate as equals in society, and where the basic tenets of freedom and human dignity are upheld. The Afghan people deserve no less, and we, as a community of nations, must deliver no less. Our goal must be to support the establishment of an Afghan-led, Afghan-owned political process that upholds human rights, fosters inclusive and representative governance, and ensures Afghanistan's integration into the international community in a manner that's consistent with international norms and values. The Afghan people have suffered enough. It is time for the international community to stand in solidarity with them and work towards a future that offers hope, dignity, and prosperity. I thank you.
Agradezco al representante.
I thank the representative of Afghanistan for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Uzbekistan.
I thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, let me extend my gratitude to the Special Representative Rosa Tumbayeva for such a comprehensive report on the situation in Afghanistan. We would like also to thank Mr. Ramesh Rajithan from OSHA and Ms. Shaharzad Akbar for the provided information. Indeed, the current situation in Afghanistan is of a serious concern to the countries of the region as well as the world community. Uzbekistan stands for making sure that Afghanistan does not become a terrorist haven once again. In other words, no threats to the states of the region and the third parties should come from this country. Besides, it would be a huge mistake leaving Afghans to their own devices with no means to tackle an area of challenge and problems. Ignoring, isolating, and imposing sanctions are making the situation even worse for the ordinary Afghan people. At the same time, formation of an inclusive government accurately reflecting all segments of the Afghan society and ensuring basic rights and human freedoms, especially of women and girls and national minorities, still constitute the fundamental condition for establishing a long-term peace in Afghanistan. One more point I want to make is that Afghanistan is on the brink of a grave humanitarian catastrophe. To our knowledge, over the next 6 months, the UN World Food Programme needs at least $1 billion to deliver vital food and materials assistance to 21 million people. Uzbekistan dispatched humanitarian aid to the Afghan people on a regular basis and, as a close neighbor of Afghanistan, advocates for providing immediate humanitarian aid to this country. Dear colleagues, we also see significant progress the new authorities of Afghanistan are making in the fight against corruption, drug addiction, drug production and trafficking, as well as the organized crime. The security situation in the country has improved significantly. According to the Afghan Ministry of Interior, almost 13,000 hectares of arable land were cleared of pupae. Nonetheless, the volume of trade in synthetic drugs such as methamphetamine increased sharply after the Taliban imposed a ban on the opium poppy cultivation. We cooperate with the Afghans within the framework of joint commissions on border and agricultural issues. We believe that in order to establish long-term peace in Afghanistan, a proper attention should focus on rebuilding the national economy as well as implementation of large-scale energy and transport projects. Among them are the construction of the Termez-Mazar-i-Sharif, Kabul-Peshawar railway line and the restoration of Afghanistan internal transport arteries. We also see potential in cooperation within the framework of the Free Trade Zone, which is being created in Termez, and its activities may be launched next year. Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, we would like once again to thank the leadership and team of UNAMA and other relevant UN agencies for their tireless work in Afghanistan. I would like to note that Uzbekistan views Afghanistan as a key factor in strengthening the regional connectivity, initiating the large macro region of Central and South Asia, the Middle East, and Eurasia as a whole. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Uzbekistan for your statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful. Mr. President, I thank you for convening this meeting. I also thank Ms. Otambayeva, the Special Representative, and other briefers for their briefings. We take note of the Secretary General report on the situation in Afghanistan. The report highlights the unprecedented humanitarian challenges in Afghanistan, with over 2/3 of its population requiring assistance. The October earthquakes in Herat province directly impacted over 150,000 people, exacerbating the situation. The revised humanitarian response, having received only 35% of the required $3.23 billion as of November 11, aims to assist 21.3 million people. Iran emphasized the need for impartial humanitarian aid and the importance of lifting sanctions to support Afghanistan's economic recovery. Mr. President, despite the de facto authorities' anti-terrorism effort, the persistent presence of Daesh and Al-Qaeda affiliates continues to pose a severe threat to Afghanistan and neighboring countries. The United Nations documented 8 attacks by Daesh affiliates from the 1st of August to 7th November, specifically targeting civilians with a notable focus on the Shia community. Mr. President, as a directly impacted neighbors dealing with the repercussion of the situation in Afghanistan and hosting millions of Afghan people, Iran maintains its active engagement with the de facto authorities. This engagement was conducted both bilaterally and through neighboring and regional mechanisms like the Moscow format, aiming to enhance and improve the humanitarian situation and facilitate Afghanistan economic recovery. From 4 to 10 November, Iran hosted a delegation of Taliban economic officials. Discussions focused on strengthening economic and trade ties, covering aspects such as trade, transit, transportation, infrastructure, and railways. Mr. President, the de facto authorities have not taken significant steps to achieve genuine ethnic and political inclusion in Afghanistan. Instead, they impose severe restrictions on women and girls, particularly affecting their access to education. In the Moscow format meeting on September 29 in Kazan, concerns were raised about restrictions imposed on women and girls, urging the establishment of a broad-based inclusive government. In this meeting, Iran proposed establishing a regional contact group for enhanced and coherent engagement with the Taliban and encouraging them to honor their obligations. Mr. President, we commend the efforts of Mr. Feridun Sinoglu during his mandate as a special coordinator and take note the independent assessment. The assessment underscored the imperative and increased and coherent international engagement with the de facto authorities and highlights positive elements, such as advocating for national political dialogue to foster inclusivity and reconciliation among Afghan political actors. This approach is crucial for uniting Afghanistan toward a secure, stable, and prosperous future. The report also called for swift international action to address the frozen assets issues and suggest a review of the sanction regime. Regarding the proposed mechanism in the recommendations, namely the International Contact Group and the appointment of a special envoy, Iran takes note but deems it premature to establish such mechanism. We advocate for thorough discussions and comprehensive examination considering existing regional mechanism and UNAMA's mandate. Moreover, addressing the challenges and concerns faced by the neighboring countries which may differ from priorities emphasized by donors and other stakeholders could pose significant obstacles to the success of establishing such a contact group. Importantly, granting equal standing to specific NATO countries, especially those accountable for the current situation in Afghanistan, without them fulfilling their responsibilities towards the Afghan people, in both unfair and counterproductive. Meanwhile, we emphasize that the international engagement should not only aim for normalization or recognition of the de facto authorities. Instead, it should contribute to improving the situation for the people, ensuring that they are the primary beneficiaries of any normalization process. In conclusion, we reaffirm once more our full support for UNAMA and the Special Representative of the Secretary General and emphasize the importance of maintaining their field presence. Iran remains steadfast in its commitment to close collaboration with neighboring countries, relevant partners, and the United Nations to promote lasting peace, security, and stability in Afghanistan. We hope that the de facto authorities will fulfill their international obligations, particularly in upholding their obligation to the neighbors. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for your statement. I now give the floor to India.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank you for convening this meeting, and I also thank the briefers, particularly Special Representative Rosa Otunbayeva, whom we have heard this morning. As a contiguous neighbor to Afghanistan, a friend to its people, and as a country with direct stakes in ensuring peace and stability in Afghanistan, allow me to place the following observations before the Council. 1. The situation in Afghanistan is still one of concern. The deteriorating humanitarian situation, compounded by natural disasters such as the earthquake of October 2023, have had a devastating impact on the lives of the people. It is therefore important for the international community to not lose its focus on Afghanistan. In this regard, we note the report submitted by Special Coordinator Feridun Sinaliolu, providing his assessment as mandated by UNSC Resolution 2679. We have indeed read the recommendations contained in the report. As a long-standing partner to the Afghan people, India will continue to engage actively with other partners with the ultimate objective of securing peace and stability in the country. India already partners with several UN agencies on the ground and will continue to do so for the welfare of the people of Afghanistan. 2. The benchmarks set by the Security Council through its Resolution 2593 continue to guide the international community's approach towards Afghanistan. Our common and immediate priorities include providing humanitarian assistance for the Afghan people, formation of an inclusive and representative government structure, combating terrorism and drug trafficking, and preserving the rights of women, children, and minorities. 3. Humanitarian assistance to the people of Afghanistan needs to be prioritized given the distressing humanitarian situation in the country. India has delivered material humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan and has also continued its educational scholarships for the Afghan students. We have also partnered with various UN agencies, including the UN World Food Programme and the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, in their humanitarian efforts. Our assistance will continue for the benefit of the people of Afghanistan. And as I conclude, Mr. President, let me state that India reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the people of Afghanistan. We will continue to be closely and actively involved in support of the Afghan people. Since this might be the last open meeting of the Council before the mandate renewal of UNAMA in March next year, I would also like to state here that we look forward to working closely with the pen holders to share our views as a neighbor of Afghanistan. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of India for your statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would like to congratulate you and the Ecuadorian delegation on your successful presidency of the Security Council this month. Pakistan welcomes this debate on Afghanistan. I would like to thank Special Representative Rosa Otunbayeva for her cogent briefing to the Council. We note the Secretary General's report on the latest developments in Afghanistan. Pakistan conveys its appreciation to the UN Special Coordinator, Ambassador Feridun Sinaliolu, for his work on the independent assessment report. We also commend the leadership role of Ambassador Nosebi and the UAE delegation as the co-pen holder on Afghanistan this year. Mr. President, peace in Afghanistan is a strategic imperative for Pakistan. As noted in the Secretary General's report, the Afghan interim authorities have further consolidated their control of Afghanistan across all spheres of governance and brought some modicum of stability in the country. Yet, Afghanistan presents a complex and enduring challenge. On the positive side, law and order has improved, opium cultivation has reduced by 95%, action against Daesh is being taken, corruption has declined notably, and efforts are being made to operate the economy through domestic revenue collection and local budgets. Afghanistan's trade with its neighbors, including transit trade, has also increased significantly. But, Mr. President, there are serious challenges. Pakistan has been the main artery for the provision of humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. Yet the humanitarian response plan, which aims to help 21.3 million Afghans, remains severely underfunded at 35%. We hope that the donor states will respond generously to the Secretary General's appeal to help the destitute people in Afghanistan. Second, the Afghan economy remains fragile, largely due to liquidity challenges, a dysfunctional banking system, and irregular cash flows, with no safeguards against terrorist financing. Smuggling into Pakistan through transit trade has also been a major problem, which we have stopped now. Pakistan supports early implementation of reconstruction and the regional connectivity projects in Afghanistan. Third, while opium cultivation has been reduced by 95%, there is an urgent need to provide support for alternative crop production to sustain farmers' livelihoods and prevent a reversal of the gains that have been made. And yet, Mr. President, the two issues which the Afghan interim government must implement its obligations on are, one, the restrictions that have been placed on women and girls' right to education and work. These edicts must be reversed. Some pragmatic solutions are possible. Pakistan will continue to work to develop such possible solutions. Two, the continued presence of terrorist groups in Afghanistan constitutes the most significant threat to Afghanistan and to the entire region and perhaps the world. While the interim authorities have reported some success in the fight against Daesh, the fact is that a number of terrorist groups are living in Afghanistan, evidently under the protection of the Afghan interim government. Pakistan, in particular, faces a major threat from the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. The TTP and its affiliates have been responsible for carrying out a series of organized cross-border terrorist attacks on our soil, causing considerable loss of our civilians and soldiers and causing considerable damage to our military and other installations. We have lost hundreds of our brave soldiers and civilians in these attacks just this year alone. And last week, a TTP-affiliated group carried out a heinous attack on our security personnel in Dera Ismail Khan, resulting in the loss of more than 23 precious lives. These attacks have become more lethal and sophisticated since the TTP terrorists have acquired and use advanced military equipment. These weapons obviously originate from the considerable stocks left behind by foreign forces. Yet the question is, how did the TTP, a listed terrorist organization, secure these weapons? Pakistan demands that the United Nations, whether UNAMA or another agency, conduct a thorough investigation to elicit how these weapons got in the hands of the TTP and to identify ways of retrieving them. It is clear that the TTP has been given free rein to conduct cross-border attacks against Pakistan's border outposts and other installations. We also have clear evidence that the TTP receives support from our main adversary. Mr. President, the Security Council should invigorate the work of the 1988 Committee to secure action by the Afghan interim government against all these terrorist groups in Afghanistan and empower the monitoring team to analyze and inform the committee and this council about progress made in the context of counterterrorism in Afghanistan. Any process of engagement with the Afghan interim government should be conducted on the basis of the action that it takes against these terrorist organizations. Else, we will see the recurrence and proliferation of terrorism from Afghanistan, as happened prior to 9/11, threatening not only the region, but the entire world. Mr. President, Pakistan has indeed paid an enormous price for its 40 years of generosity towards Afghanistan. After 40 years, we continue to host 1.4 million registered Afghan refugees with little or no support from the international community. Since the Afghan interim government claims that peace has been restored in Afghanistan, it should work with the High Commissioner for Refugees to make preparations for the early repatriation of these Afghan refugees. There were another 2.2 million Afghans who are in Pakistan undocumented and illegally present there. These include 700,000 who crossed into Pakistan after the Taliban takeover. Besides the security threat posed by terrorist sleeper cells, many of these illegals are involved in drug trafficking, operate property mafias and other crimes. And the inflow of such large numbers has had a negative impact on Pakistan's economy and jobs market. The current plan to repatriate the illegal foreigners is an unavoidable compulsion on Pakistan arising from our legitimate security, economic, and social concerns. However, the plan is being implemented in as humane a way as possible. There is no forcible return except for a number of Afghan criminals in our jails. More than 98% of the over 244,000 Afghans who departed through Torkhan last month were voluntary returns. The Chaman crossing has a similar pattern. We have made exceptions for those who have proof of registration, for those who have the Afghan citizenship card, and now also for those who are considered vulnerable. These are besides the 60,000 or more who are awaiting for 2 years to be relocated to third countries. And we urge those third countries to accelerate their process in order to receive these people who they have agreed to receive as such and lighten the burden on Pakistan. Mr. President, we hope that Ambassador Feridun Siniroglu's assessment will enable the Security Council and all relevant stakeholders in the international community to adopt a comprehensive, long-term, and realistic roadmap for Afghanistan's normalization. Any process of engagement with the Afghan interim government must be constituted on the basis of its response to the core concerns of the international community: respect for human rights, particularly the rights of women and girls, political inclusivity, and action to neutralize the terrorist organizations in Afghanistan, not only Daesh, but also the TTP and other entities which threaten the security of Afghanistan's neighbors. Pakistan will participate in the Secretary General's revived Doha format, and we hope that consensus will be reached on the recommendations of the report submitted by the Special Coordinator. I thank you, Mr. President.
Agradezco al representante.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for your statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.